I'm honored to have back with me someone who is a very dear friend and someone who is the most courageous person I know on planet Earth, Bob Mazur. Little background on Bob. Bob has earned the global acclaim as one of the world's leading experts on the financial escapades of the underworld. There is no one with more firsthand knowledge about how international banks and businesses cater to those who own the nearly $2 trillion with a T, $2 trillion in criminal proceeds laundered annually. For years, in the eyes of organized crime leaders, Bob was a highly successful mob-connected money launderer that helped manage their illicit fortunes. Bob's clients, some of the most famous and deadly drug cartel bosses, including Pablo Escobar, offered a $500,000 price tag on Bob's head when arrests were made around the world and he was revealed to be a highly trained U.S. federal undercover agent. Bob is the author of a phenomenal book. I encourage you to get it, The Infiltrator, a memoir about his undercover life, much of which was spent acting as a conduit between ruthless drug barons and corrupt, legitimate-appearing senior executives that cleaned billions in blood-stained money through their otherwise respectable international banks and businesses. Bob has transformed his underworld experience and current-day involvement in money laundering field into a remarkable lesson for every person of our country and the world. After completing a highly decorated 27-year career as a federal agent in 3 U.S. agencies, Bob is now the president of Kyc Solutions, a firm that provides speaking expert witnesses and consulting services to companies and people worldwide. Bob's book, The Infiltrator, is now available in 10 languages in more than 50 countries and is the basis for the internationally major motion picture by the same name, The Infiltrator, my favorite movie, starring Bryan Cranston, Diane Kruger, and other internationally known cast members. More information about Bob Mazur and his book and the film on his life can be found at robertmazur.com, robertmazur.com. Bob, welcome back to Operation Freedom.
Well, thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to be on your show.
So, Bob, let's do a little bit of a. You are a renowned speaker around the world. Let's do a little bit of a seminar for our listeners today. Let's start with you giving a brief explanation of your journey in the undercover world, then the training that benefited you in that journey, because you were dealing with ruthless individuals, and then let's talk about how your training focusing on persuasion and negotiation played not just in your experience, but can help our listeners.
Sure. Well, I was blessed with leadership that recognized that it was important before someone could do long-term undercover to actually train them. And so when I decided that, I thought my background, playing the role of a money launderer, was probably fit to do that role, in that I had a business administration finance degree, accounting background, and had worked in a bank and a brokerage firm. Those personal traits put me in a position where if I could learn how to do undercover work, I could be, I thought, pretty effective in the role of playing a supposed money launderer. So I volunteered to be a long-term undercover agent. I went through the training, and after going through the training, I spent about 18 months putting together what I think is one of the more sophisticated fronts used in undercover and money laundering, and we embarked on an undercover operation that lasted about 2 years. My partner and I recorded during that time frame probably 1,200 conversations, not just with drug traffickers, but with senior executives of banks. And then after that, when the operation went down, unfortunately, it got a little bit sticky about 30 days after the undercover operation ended, when they realized who I was. According to 2 law enforcement agencies and an intelligence agency, there was a contract on my life. And so my wife and I and my 2 kids went underground for quite a few years while I prepared for trial. And over a period of 2 years, testified around the world against many of the people who reported directly to Pablo Escobar. He was an owner of some of the funds that were being laundered, as were 2 of his highest-level direct reports. So after that operation, I was recruited into the Drug Enforcement Administration, and at that stage, to become a long-term undercover agent as soon as I got through training in Quantico. I then went back undercover for about 2.5 years, this time a lot of it in Panama, dealing with people who represented the Cali cartel, as well as people in other walks of the underworld. So, had I not been blessed with that school and the training that I got from, I think, some of the best trainers that do that type of work, and psychologists who do that type of work, and former long-term undercover agents who are part of the training, one of whom I've become very good friends with, Joe Pistone, who the book and the movie Donnie Brasco is based upon. But at that undercover school, there were many, many different types of topics that we addressed, not just how to build an undercover identity in a very, very sound way, a personal ID, a personal history, personal credit, business history, how to work around database problems, then how to prepare an undercover operational plan, everything from A to Z about electronic monitoring by the good guys and by the bad guys. Record keeping and evidence processing, report writing, proper documentation, surveillance by the good guys and by the bad guys, and counter surveillance and how to detect it. Key legal issues, defense tactics. Let me tell you, there are probably about 8 or 10 defense tactics that are used by every really good defense attorney that gets paid millions to defend these bad guys, and they know what those tactics are that they're going to use. If you don't understand what they are, you can't defend yourself against them, and how to prepare for trial. But one of the topics that I thought was most important for me, and one that I think has application to all of us in every walk of life, is how to enhance your ability to persuade and to negotiate. And when I say that, I mean persuade and negotiate people to trust you, not to commit a crime, because you're not there for the purposes of being an agent provocateur to try to get them to commit a crime. What you are doing is you're dealing with people who are at the highest levels of crime who don't trust anyone. And it is extremely difficult to get them to trust you. But think about it in life. I mean, you could be a salesman, and you're going for the biggest possible contract that you ever thought you could land for your company. You've got the same challenges. You've got to persuade and negotiate the point of contact and that company, that you have the ability to do what you tell them you can do, and why it is that it's so important for them to become one of your clients. It's also just as important in your own workplace with your boss. Establishing an enhanced rapport with him is extremely important, and it can be that way in your social life as well. But where does that start? Where do you begin to persuade someone that you are a person who can be trusted? Well, the first thing you need to do is you need to do your homework. And I'm going to give you an example of this that you can see in the film The Infiltrator, where Bryan Cranston plays me, and Benjamin Bratt plays a trafficker, a high-level trafficker that I dealt with by the name of Roberto Alcaino. I knew that in order for me to succeed and to get to the top levels, I had to win Roberto over. Now, I had already won 1 or 2 levels underneath him. But if I had so boldly thought that my goal of getting to be in direct contact with Pablo Escobar and his henchmen, that I would be able to do that by meeting the first level, it would have been a waste of time. There's no way you can do it. You have to build blocks as you're going along. And this part of it you need to do confidentially, because if you are seen by that person you want to bring in as a client to be putting together a dossier, that's going to backfire on you. But you need to do your homework, because you need to understand what common ground you potentially have with these people. How do you open up lines of communication? How do you better understand them? What are their likes and dislikes? How do you gain an advantage to determine the best way to approach them? So the number one thing you need to do is begin to collect information. Now, with Roberto Alcaino, I had an advantage. He had been the subject of major, major investigations all over the United States before that had failed. So there was information that I could garner through other people in my office about his personal life. I knew that he was Argentinian and Sicilian. I knew his wife's name. I knew he had 2 teenage daughters. I knew he was a collector of Rolls Royces. I knew he owned a high-end jewelry store, and that he was an art collector and enjoyed Impressionist paintings. And I also knew that he lived in a mansion in Pasadena that overlooked the Rose Bowl. So with those things that I knew before I ever met him, I began to learn as much as I could about things unique to Argentina. Argentina was then emerging as one of the major producers of wine in the Mendoza province, which is not very far from the Maipo Valley in Chile, and very big wine producing. So I did a little bit of homework on that. I did a little bit of homework on Monet, Pendergast, and a bunch of other Impressionists that I knew I could talk with him about. My bodyguard, when he first met me, was a source of mine, played in the film by a person who's portrayed as Dominic. But when you see Dominic, it's clear he's Sicilian. And he played the role of my cousin. So when Roberto came to my house, I never said anything about it. We happened to come to the house, and the garage door automatically opened. And what he saw in my driveway was a Rolls Royce in the garage. I never said a word about it. We just walked into the house. Passive reinforcement, we have something in common. He then meets Dominic. Clearly, he knows Dominic is Sicilian and that I am part Sicilian. Eventually, I actually got some advice from Dominic about Roberto, because after I met him, he would always promise that we were going to do big business, and it just fizzled, and it didn't really come through. So I said to Dominic, hey, listen, what do you do in the underworld when you have that kind of a situation? And he goes, well, it's really easy. He goes, when the guy tells me that we're partners and, we're in this together and we're going to do big business together, I got to take advantage of that opportunity, and I generally would give him a gift. And at that stage, I'm thinking, well, I'm with the government, and they're not going to give me money to give this guy a gift, that's for sure. And if it is, it's probably going to be like back in the day, a 19-inch black and white TV. It's not going to be anything of real import. But what Dominic did was he loaned to the agency a piece of high-end jewelry. And he didn't get paid for it. If we lost it at the end, he would have been put in for a reward, but we didn't lose it. It was a gold cross, quarter-inch thick gold, diamond-studded, worth about $25,000. And we actually did paperwork with our chief counsel's office, taking custody of it on loan from him. And I remember the day that I gave that to Roberto Alcaino. We had flown in on a private jet that I used in the operation to Teterboro Airport, got in a limo, went to Wall Street to a brokerage firm where he knew that I was involved in that brokerage firm. And then afterward, we went to drop him off. And as he went to get out of the limo, I held the door and I said, Roberto, you had promised me so many times that that we trust each other 100%. Do we or don't we? And he said, well, of course we do. And I said, well, that means that we're going to do the type of business you talked about. Yes, of course. I said, well, okay. Then it's my obligation within my family to bless our relationship with a gift. And this is a gift from us to commemorate the fact that I will die for you, you will die for me, and we are in this together. So please take this as a token of our appreciation. He opened it up. Now, he's a jeweler. He's also a very religious man. He opened it up. He immediately knew this was a very expensive gift. It also supported his religious beliefs, because hard to imagine, but these guys, no matter how bad they are, sometimes practice a religion. And it meant a lot to him, and I know it meant a lot to him because after he was arrested and there was a search done at his house, that gold cross was in the bedstand next to his bed. Clearly, when he prayed at night, he used it. those were all things that were done in advance, based upon study, to make sure that we knew who we were dealing with and to try to find as many things in common with them before I even met them. The next thing that we address is interpreting verbal and nonverbal cues. You know, people do things and react in ways that say much more than the words that are coming out of their mouth. You basically develop a sixth sense when you study verbal and nonverbal cues. Give you an example. In undercover school, I was taught, listen, you're going to meet somebody for the first time, worst thing you can do is sit across from them face to face. You want to set up a situation where you guys are not in that position, and you want to make sure that your arms are not folded, you're at ease, you're open to them and trusting to them. So when I was in Paris and I met with a guy in the Medellin cartel higher up than Roberto, I found the area in the alcove of a hotel where there was a couch and two chairs. I made sure that I sat in that chair, in a couch, and when he got there, it was clear I was getting him into one of those chairs. I sat back. I never crossed anything. We talked. When I got to important issues that I wanted to speak with him about, I leaned forward. I slowed the pace of my talk. I looked him directly in the eyes, and he knew that I was sincere and what it is that I was talking about. Not every single time will all of these little things work, but they do give you a leg up. And I could spend the next half hour talking to you about what verbal clues and nonverbal clues are. But I'm going to give you an example of a mistake that I made on a verbal clue that was picked up by a high-level guy. I met with him, and I said to him, we were meeting in Paris, and I said, okay, when you come to Florida, I definitely want to bring you to New York. I want you to meet my cousin who runs a brokerage firm. I want you to, that's my home turf. I'd like to take you to my investment company. I want to show you this, I want to show you that. And he just stopped, and he looked at me, and he said, why do I get the impression it's so important to you that I go to your business in New York? And it was like I got hit in the stomach. I realized that I was giving up verbal clues about the props that I wanted him to see because I thought that they would win him over, and you can push too hard on those types of things. It's a very, very delicate art to do. Then another thing you need to do is to develop a macro and a micro plan. I mean, I knew where I wanted to go eventually, but I had to visualize in my own mind how would I get from point A to point B, and I had to be flexible enough to know that if I went from A to B, okay, there might be a C1 and a C2, and if either one opened up, I'm going to go that way. How can you possibly be prepared, adequately prepared? You have to have a plan. My plan was so detailed. For example, when Roberto Alcaino would come through Miami, I knew we would get together. I knew he would come to my home. I knew we would talk for a while before he went back to L.A. And I knew what I wanted to cover with him. So what I wound up doing is I sat there in my undercover home in Key Biscayne. And I would sit in the room that I knew I would be ultimately sitting with Roberto. I would visualize him there, me where I was. I would spend a day thinking in my own mind about what it is that I wanted to cover and how it is that I could raise those issues. And I anticipated the tough questions coming back from him. I played and replayed that meeting over 100 times before it happened, so that by the time that he got there, no matter how that meeting went, for me, it was a rerun. I could be very comfortable. I could be very at ease because I knew how the conversation should go and could go. Now, does that mean you can't be prepared for a surprise? No, you've got to be. But that's how you prepare to persuade and negotiate with someone by making sure that you have forethought out where they're going to come from. Another one, finding answers with silence and active listening. If you watch the film, you'll see a scene in an old theater where Bryan Cranston comes in. He's meeting for the first time with Roberto Alcaino. There's an old Western being played, and the only person in the theater when Cranston walks in is Roberto Alcaino. When Cranston tries to talk, Alcaino puts up his hand because he wants to watch the rest of a scene. But then he does something using silence and active listening by throwing out an open-ended question and then being silent. And that silence and a look back at Cranston causes so much eagerness within Cranston to say things that he begins to talk about stuff. And what Roberto said as he turned to Cranston, to my figure, he said, so, Mr. Masella, what can you do for me? And then he just looked at him. And it was obvious at that stage that I needed to say something. I needed to fill the void, because the longer the silence went, the more awkward I began to feel. Now, that happened to me. My mom passed away this year. I spent a lot of time with people from hospice. And one of the people was a spiritual leader. And I went through the rundown of how my mom was doing with him. And here's a great example of silence and active listening. Because he said to me after I went through all that, and how are you doing? And I did what most people say. I said, oh, I'm fine. And he didn't say anything. He just looked at me. And the look on his face was like, you're not telling me enough. And I was awkward. I talked to him for 5 minutes about my deepest feelings. And that happened because he successfully used silence and active listening. So I know we're getting close to running out of time. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, we have one minute, Bob.
Okay. So, earning trust. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And when they know you care, it enhances rapport, establishes credibility, and enables a person to subtly know you care about them.